This episode is brought to you by Vital Farms. Isn't it bullshit to have to question where your food comes from? At Vital Farms, you can trace your pasture-raised eggs all the way back to the source, the pasture. On the side of each pasture-raised carton of eggs, you'll find the name of the farm where your eggs were laid. And when you look the farm up on their website, you'll get a peek at all the sunshine, fresh air, and open space the hens enjoy. Learn more and find out where to buy them at vitalfarms.com. Vital Farms, keeping it bullshit-free.
This episode is brought to you by Kia's first 3-row all-electric SUV, the Kia EV9, with available all-wheel drive and seating for up to 7 adults, with a 0 to 60 speed that thrills you 1 minute and available reclining lounge seats that unwind you the next. Visit kia.com/EV9 to learn more. Ask your Kia dealer for availability. No system, no matter how advanced, can compensate for all driver error and or driving conditions. Always drive safely.
Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Welcome to the podcast. In this podcast episode, I talk with Shawn Shewchuk about leveraging a growth mindset to level up and achieve. Shawn Shewchuk, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Calgary, Canada, I believe you said. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about leveraging a growth mindset to level up and achieve. I think a growth mindset is such a crucial toolkit, mindset toolkit for people, regardless of your role within any organization or whether we're talking about at home or in your community. We need to learn how to better develop, foster, and leverage growth mindset if we hope to be agile and adaptive in this crazy world that we're in, infinitely nuanced and complex and messy, and things seem to be changing at a more and more rapid pace. So growth mindset, I think, is where it's at and what it's all about. As we get started, I wanted to share Shawn's bio with everybody. Shawn Shewchuk is considered the go-to for those entrepreneurs, high achievers, and leaders that are driven to achieve more and collapse timeframes. He is known as the productivity speaker, the #1 results coach, 2-time best-selling author, and most recently named one of the top 25 speakers of 2022. What a tremendous background. Anything you would like to highlight from your background or personal context before we dive on in?
You know what, I'll share this very quickly, and thank you for asking. Yeah, one of the things that's come out of this that's not really part of the bio that you read, which I'll do my best to live up to, is we've had a really strong call from folks in the expert space, coaches, speakers, trainers, asking, and it was never our focus or my audience, but folks that want to grow, expand, and scale in that space. And so something that's come over the course of the last couple of years we've done is really put a part of our time into working with folks in that space. There's an unfortunate fact that from a coaching standpoint, most coaches can't afford to pay attention, never mind their bills. And although they may have an incredible story, a lifetime of knowledge, skill, education, and experience, bringing that to bear and actually realizing two things: one, the positive impact they should have on others, and secondly, the monetary aspect for themselves seems to be a big challenge, and due in part to the fact that selling an intangible or something they can't see, feel, and touch seems to present its own unique set of challenges. And so we've invested a lot of time in that. Just a side note, because so many times I probably get about 10 inquiries a week through our website, through our office phone lines, through social media, and it's coaches saying, "Hey, can Shawn help me?"
Yeah, Yeah, I think you've highlighted a really important aspect of the coaching world. It is a challenge, and I know for myself because I'm a professor, so that's my day job, what I spend the majority of my time doing. But I run my own firm. I do consulting work. I do coaching work as well. Things like this podcast, and I know. I could have conversations all day long. I could produce content. I can write. I do all sorts of stuff. I love meeting with people. I hate selling myself. I hate doing the PR, the marketing, that kind of stuff. It's just not what I want to spend my time doing. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that's a common mentality for people in the space.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah. Well, very good. Well, thank you for that as a background. Now I'm excited to really dive into this idea of growth mindset and developing, fostering, developing, maintaining that, and leveraging it in the workforce. So maybe start with just from your frame of reference, like, what does growth mindset mean to you? I think there's been it's gained, some traction. I think you have Brene Brown and others who have popularized the idea. What does growth mindset mean to you? Why is it important?
By the way, she's incredible. I was at an event pre-COVID where she was the keynote speaker in Boston. And so just, you mentioned I'm from Canada, probably about 85 or 90% of our clients and the work we do is in the United States. And I spent, other than, COVID, when travel was challenging, I spent a lot of time down there, but she was amazing. I got the privilege to interact with her a little bit. She's amazing. I'll go back to answer your question. I'll go back a little bit. If we go back through history, all the great thinkers and theologians, philosophers throughout history have agreed on one thing. And the only one thing they agree on is what we think about we become. And I realize I'm paraphrasing that a little bit, but that's the idea behind it. So everything around you, the seat you're sitting in, the car you drive, the home you live in was at one point in time an idea in somebody's mind that moved into physical form as a result of taking some predetermined action steps. And so the reality of what we have to understand is what we're going to engage in, what we think about, the internal conversations that we have are the most powerful things out there. If you, and there are people that will debate me on this, but if we start looking at those out there who have achieved success, whatever that means to them, everything was based on a decision. Your life, every single one of us, your life is based on two things. One is the decisions you make. Everything in life is predicated on that. And then the second one is life would be really boring, even if you happen to be an introvert or feel you are, without people. Yeah. The relationships that you establish, nurture, and build are the second step in that. You can't build a business without relationships. Every company, every organization is a sales organization. Even if it's a not-for-profit, it's still a sales organization. So everything you do involves sales. Everything you do involves what you think, how you, and who you hang out with. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and one of their children was hanging out with an interesting crowd. And he sat his son down and he was having a conversation with his son. And he said, do you realize that the people, he goes, Dad, the child says, I'm essentially immune, right? I make up my mind, I make my decisions. He said, well, you may, and you may think you do, but you are organically going to do those things that they're doing. There's some relatively new research that says that everything we observe with our eyes, our brain is creating new neural pathways to help us to achieve what it is we are observing. So if you are observing something that and maybe these are conversations you have private parties, but you shouldn't be doing, you shouldn't be involved, you shouldn't be part of, and there are things we shouldn't be, we are going to automatically start to move in that direction, because how we have been created is that what we observe, we're going to start doing. The longer we observe it, the longer we engage with it. So if we're going to make a decision to say, I'm going to do X, I don't care. In the book, Good to Great, he talks about great, big, hairy, audacious goals. Mm-hmm. If we're going to start talking about achieving more and doing it in a different way, we have to be able to make change, something dramatic. And, for generations now, we've been talking about goals. And yes, we need to set goals, and it needs to be the right goal. And, if we know how to do something, it's not a goal. The sole purpose of a goal is growth. But the reality of this is it has to be something that motivates, inspires, and scares us all at the same time. And it has to be big. And then what we have to realize is because we're human and because we make commitments that we don't always live up to, whether we want to admit that or not, we have to take that great big hairy audacious goal and break it down into bite-sized pieces that we can assimilate and understand and start to work towards. I'm a simple guy. I grew up a farm kid. You can eat a whole apple, but you probably can't eat an entire apple in one bite. So what we need to understand is you can, if the last year and we'll use money, if you made $100,000 and your goal for this coming year is $1 million, can you do it? Yes. Are you going to have to do something dramatically different to get there? The answer is yes. So a couple things come to mind. Change. Most people avoid change and fear. I have found the only people that embrace change are babies in wet diapers. Outside of that, we don't like to change. Fear. There's this terror barrier that we get up and we have this incredible idea. We're going to accomplish whatever it is. We're going to change the world. And then we see this terror barrier. And it looks like it's far too high to get over or go around or go through. And we go right back to that comfort zone that we've painted ourselves into, that easy chair. Reality is the terror barrier is it doesn't exist. It's paper mache. It's a mirage. We view it differently. And when we start to understand that fear is nothing outside of our heads, there's no fear out here. It exists in here. The idea of making progress and collapsing timeframes changes dramatically. When you make not just a decision, an irrevocable decision, your life changes.
Yeah. I love that. And I think owning our humanity that way, like understanding how we are always constantly making sense of the world around us. We each have our own individual personalized reality. And we get to choose largely. I mean, there's all sorts of processes. There's chemicals, there's the brain wiring, there's the evolutionary psychology, like all this stuff. There's like all these things that impact us for sure. And I don't want to dismiss that. And there are external forces impacting us as well. But ultimately, we get to decide how we're going to respond to the world around us and the reality that comes alive in our minds, right? And so if we recognize that, and then we can, choose to lean into the change, recognize that our evolutionary nature is, fight or flight, that we don't like change. We like at least the illusion of stability and security and, the faux, consistency, like that's where we gravitate towards, but we don't need, like, we're not stuck there. Like we can choose to do something differently. We can choose to recognize that, oh yeah, our evolutionary brain, puts us in this certain mode of fight or flight, when we're faced with challenging situations or when we're faced with change. Once we recognize that, once we can, go through the internal dialogue to respond to that when it's happening so that we're not just reactionary, then we can choose to face change in a different way, where we're not as we're not as resistant. We're not as like immediately putting up walls around us to try to keep us safe and secure. And once we recognize the value of change and what that brings to the table for us and our own ongoing evolution personally, for our teams at work, etc., then growth mindset becomes a natural output of that, right? It becomes like the next thing. Okay, change is inevitable. Change is all around us all the time. We need to learn how to lean into that change. How do we do that? We do that through growth. We do that through continually developing ourselves.
You referenced sort of the leadership component there, and I think that's an important topic to delve into, because for those of us that are leaders that lead a team or I've worked with organizations and divisions of companies and not-for-profits and NGOs all over the United States, Canada, some in Europe. And at the end of the day, it's people. And, people can be the greatest resource or they can be the opposite. It's really dependent upon the leader. And I've often said this: people don't quit a company; they quit their boss. And there's a reality when we start talking about leadership. Leadership is not anything to do with the title that appears on a business card. This is really about how we show up. And if we're able to, from a leadership perspective, give of ourselves in a way from leaders that shows what has to happen. If we go back to the 1970s, leadership style was, communication was one way. You did this or you got fired. That's just how it worked. It came from the ivory tower down, and that was how it is. Today's leadership style has so progressed so much over the course of the last number of years, if you want a successful team, you want a successful organization, your most important resource is not your office building. It's not your address. Maybe that's important in certain areas, but if it comes down to people, because if you don't have people that contribute at a high level, that have the mindset that we are talking about today in this conversation, you're going to have a challenge. A number of years ago, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I went out for dinner with one of my kids, and we were coming out of the restaurant, and down the street, half a block, there was another restaurant, and there was a gentleman coming out with his wife and son. And this is a gentleman that used to work for me 25 years prior. And we ended up meeting in the parking lot and saying hello and shaking hands and pleasantries. And I asked him how his business was doing. And he said something interesting to me. He said, "Oh, you know what? Things aren't very good. My staff are driving it into the ground." The staff don't drive anything into the ground.
Yeah.
Right. The leader is leading it in that direction, or maybe not. And that's part of the challenge. So when we start talking about progress, and we start talking about change, we start talking about success at any level, everything starts in the 6 inches between our ears. And if we're going to have a successful company, a successful team, if we're going to build something extraordinary, it all starts in the 6 inches between our ears. And when we make that decision, we talked about a moment ago or a few minutes back on the irrevocable side of things, we say, this is the outcome that I'm going to achieve. And we tie a finite amount of time to it. Human nature is we'll fill whatever time we're given. So if we say, I'm going to hit, and we talked about a dollar figure, let's say $1 million, and you're an entrepreneur, let's say, for example, I'm going to do $1 million in 2024. What we need to understand is just saying it isn't going to make a difference. We have to be able to reverse engineer that and say, okay, what is it has to happen every month, every week, every day? And if you happen to be a guy like me with maybe a touch of undiagnosed ADHD, what has to happen every hour in order for me to attain that? And when we start to understand that what more of the same gives us more of the same, what got us to where we are isn't going to take us where we want to go, we then can start to make those shifts and changes based upon that irrevocable decision from a mindset standpoint, how we view things. If you wake up every morning and you don't want to get out of bed and life sucks, your whole day is going to be that way. And then it stretches into the week and the month, etc. And, this is where some of us encounter some of the challenges we see going on today.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's assume for a moment, like we're able, ourselves, members of our team, we're able to get people on board to recognizing the importance of growth mindset and developing it. Then it becomes like proactively, how do we go about exercising that muscle, right? And developing that skill. Once we start to develop that skill, then it's a question of, well, how do we then fully leverage it within an organizational context, within a team context, to help us achieve more?
One of the first things that I think happens when we start making a shift and a change is there's a certain level of, we're uncomfortable. It's unknown territory. And from the leadership perspective, it's about understanding that the folks we have the privilege to work with are going to experience that as well. And it's about taking them through an experience. One of the things, and I was working with an organization, they have offices incidentally, both in Canada and US, and in where I'm in Calgary and down in Dallas, and incredible number of staff and people. They have offices, in the energy sector, because that's kind of the both sides of the border where I am and in Texas. But and when they started to understand the leadership standpoint and the ivory tower that they needed to make a shift and a change, there was an incredible amount of resistance. And at the end of the day, if you need to motivate somebody, the biggest part about it is helping them to understand what it is that they benefit. We are, whether we want to admit it or not, we're closet narcissists. If you talk to somebody and you want to engage in conversation with them, our favorite topics is talking about us. If the sweetest music that your ears can hear is your name, right? If I say, how are you? That's great. If I say, how are you, John? Well, that makes a whole difference to us. And so when we start to personalize this for people, one of the things I've done a lot of times, especially with leadership when I go in, is helping the leadership. And we're talking about brilliant people who have built some of the most incredible companies in the world, the best teams in the world. But when they start to understand that people sometimes follow them because they feel they have to, not because they want to, it changes the dynamic of the conversation. And so when people start to experience something that motivates them, and that comes from leadership, if we start to have conversations around what is important to others, it changes the dynamic of whether we want to, in human nature, whether we want to engage. And so it's about service. If you're able to provide that level of service, and I don't mean you're going and becoming someone's servant, I mean how you serve and support in a role of a leader changes the dynamic of the response you get from them. And when people are responding rather than reacting, change is imminent. And it's positive because that's where the leader is taking them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess moving into the rest of our time, let's really hone in on this idea of leveraging the growth mindset. We want to exercise that muscle. We want to develop it. We want to sustain it and maintain it. But it's one thing for me to foster a growth mindset myself, and even the personal growth that can come from that. That's all wonderful. But in my mind, when I think of the word leverage, I think of something a little bit different. Like I'm now taking whatever that mindset is, that skill set that I might have, and I'm catapulting it right into greater levels of achievement, greater levels of productivity. It's not just about me anymore, about my own personal growth, but I'm leveraging it now into the team, into the organization. What do you think about in terms of this leveraging component? How do we leverage growth mindset into achievement and productivity and greater efficiencies and just doing cool stuff?
Well, I'm maybe my approach is a little bit different. I look at productivity as the description of productivity is any action step or activity that moves you in the direction of your goal or objective. So we've been talking about productivity for generations. We've been saying, we have to become more productive. If you look at the average person today in the United States, they're productive 4 out of 24 hours, which is not an exceptional amount. If we help folks to understand, and this is what I spend a great deal of time doing, if we help folks understand what those high leverage activities are that are going to ensure that they achieve what it is they have set out to or collaboratively committed to. So remember, we talked about a few moments ago about reverse engineering. So let's say it's someone's goal within an organization, a team environment, that they achieve a certain level of proficiency, of sales, of whatever that target or objective is. If we reverse engineer that and we say, here's what has to happen, and they will do this. There's a formula to this. Here's what has to happen every month, week, day, maybe even hour, in order for us to achieve this target. And we break this down. What that means is, in order to increase productivity, the only thing they are taking action on are those high leverage activities that are going to move them in the direction of their goal or objective. That means they're going to know and understand what it is, the activities that they're currently probably doing, and most people have things they shouldn't be doing. What are those things that you shouldn't be doing? If you're engaged in activities that are non-productive based upon what you have set as a goal or objective, or have collaborated with it within a team matrix of what you should or shouldn't be doing to achieve this, and maybe it's not about a shouldn't be doing, but you can't grow, expand, or scale. You can't succeed at any level. And this is the transactional side of having a positive mindset. You are unable to do that if you're focused on the things that are going to hold you back. So from the transactional aspect of this, we need to make a determination. What are those predetermined action steps that are going to ensure we achieve what we set out to? And then we commit to that based on a time frame, whatever that happens to be, to achieving those. Now, there are a lot of people who don't want to talk about this because this is where rubber meets the road, and this is the tough conversations. Yeah. It's great to talk about the flowery side of this and say, I'm going to achieve X, Y, and Z. But X, Y, and Z do not happen unless we come back to those, sometimes what is considered the tough conversation, to say, I have to make a shift and a change. In other words, I'm not going to achieve this if I'm doing, A, B, and C. So A, B, and C are now off the table. D, E, F are those areas that I need to engage in every day. And typically it's 3 high leverage activities that we're engaged in on an ongoing basis. If we look at truly successful people today, they work kind of what's been promoted as a law of threes for the last 50 or 60 years. But truly successful people only focus on 3 things at any given time that are going to move them forward. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have more than 3 things on the go. It just means they're only personally engaged in those 3 things that are high leverage. And if we focus on, throughout my last book and some of the material that we use, we call them HLAs, high leverage activities. If you are constantly aware of and focused on and engaged in those high leverage activities, you will achieve what it is you set out to. If we reverse, if we want to call it that irrevocable decision that we made at the outset, to say, this is what I'm going to do, come hell or high water, the skies can be falling, this is what's going to happen, we'll achieve that. That doesn't mean there aren't going to be challenges. That doesn't mean we're not going to face, an uphill battle in certain things. And this is where most people give up. They're faced with something they perceive as insurmountable, and they go, okay, I'm done. I'm out. There's no way on God's green earth I can do this. And they throw in the towel. I've built, and I share this because I'm no better than anyone else. And if you would have told me, 50 some years ago as a farm kid that I would be doing what I am doing today, I would have probably laughed at you or worse. I was an introvert. When I moved from small town to big city and I worked for a cell phone carrier when I was in university, I remember them having a group. They brought some speaker in from the Eastern Seaboard, and he said, I want you to go around the room and shake hands and introduce yourself to everybody. And I stood at the back of the room. Cell phones weren't quite as smart then as they are now. And I remember, staring at my shoes to make sure they were still shiny, because the last thing I wanted to do was go shake hands with a bunch of strangers. Not because I was worried about, the physical contact. It wasn't who I was. Yeah. If we can get past some of those things, and you can, it's not an if, but we have to make that decision to do that hold us back. We can make that shift in the change. And it really comes down to what we just talked about, understanding what we shouldn't be doing. And in a team environment, one of the things that happens is you work together to find out what it is you should be doing, and put a focus on an emphasis on those things that you should be doing, those high leverage activities that are going to make the shift and the change and deliver the outcomes based upon, and we use the term from Colin's book, Good to Great, Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal.
Yeah, I love it. Shawn, this has just been a great conversation. I know at the time I need to let you go, but before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
I want to thank you for having me on. First of all, if you want more information, go to changeyourresults.com. If you're a coach expert out there, go to something we just did. It's called linefactorcoaching.com. Take a look around. It's something brand new that's launching in November. Listen, if you want to increase productivity, you want to get yourself to a place that you haven't been before, do a little introspection, find out what you think you should do differently, make that shift and change, and make the irrevocable decision to do it, and then execute. It's not about taking action. It's about executing on what those predetermined action steps are.
Great. Thank you, Shawn. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Shawn can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.